Well, good morning. This is going to be a very comfortable and chill session for you guys to eat and listen to me go on and on about my life and about our athletic department. So, my name is Robby Crihfield. And first of all, before I get started, I want to thank TAPPS as an organization and the board members for all the work that they do for this organization. As you're about to hear, I've been involved in TAPPS for 13 years as a professional, and then I also played as a high school student. And this organization really is first class, and it's a pleasure to be a part of, and it's an honor. So I want to thank them for giving me a microphone as well, and hopefully they don't regret it. But in all seriousness, man, before I get started with this book and the principles within it that have changed not only my life, but a lot of our kids' lives and our coaches' lives and our athletic department as a whole, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I played high school sports at Brazosport Christian School, which is also the school that I'm the athletic director at right now, back in the 2000s. And then after that, went on to Sam Houston State University, got the kinesiology degree, moved on to Central Texas. That's where I first started coaching, right down the road at Central Texas Christian School in Temple. So there I coached football, basketball, and baseball, and then taught history and Bible and all the prototypical coach classes. But volleyball was what I really wanted to coach going forward. I played a lot of volleyball down in Galveston where we grew up, and in Sam Houston as well. So that's what I really wanted to coach, but they didn't have an opening there. So Live Oak Classical School here in Waco had an opening, I think it was 2012, I believe. So I applied for that, and they took a chance on me, which is still wild because I think I was 28, 26 or something at the time, real young. And then went there, and we had a really good group of kids, a good group of parents, and we set every volleyball record on the book for them. Went to 4 straight Final Fours, lost in 2 state championships. And then this job came open when my wife and I had our first daughter. And we were very happy in Waco, so we didn't really want to take it, but having both of our grandparents there back at home in Lake Jackson was a big deal for us, so we ended up taking the job, and then I started to learn how to be an athletic director on the fly, and I do mean on the fly because it was rough. But man, within the first 2 years at Brazosport Christian School, we set every volleyball record on the board in volleyball, went to the regional final for the first time in school history. We made it to the baseball state final, lost in the Final Four in softball, and then got pregnant with our son. So all things were coming up Team Crihfield in this first 2 years down at Brazosport Christian School. Well, as fate would have it, we had 2 really big graduating classes and 2 very small incoming junior high classes. So we went from a big 2A school to being a small 2A school with 1A numbers in a district where we had Conroe and Alpha Omega that were really going 3A. So we, all things success, right, in my mind, and then we went to getting absolutely demolished in every sport that we were playing. When I say it was brutal, I mean it was brutal. I was demoralized, I was embarrassed, and honestly, I was at a big loss for words on how to tell our kids what they were doing, how to tell them that they still needed to try hard, how to tell them that there was still purpose in this and there was still meaning. Because by my very definition, we were failures and I was failing. And they were following my lead. They were doing everything that I was doing. And you guys know this full well, I'm sure, as coaches. Your kids know when you're full of it. If you don't believe what you're saying and you don't believe what you're putting out, then they're not going to believe it either. And that's kind of where we were, man, and it was bad. And so at this very time, my daughter was, I think, 3 at the time. So I was cussing a lot at the house. I was very frustrated. And she picked up on that, and she started cussing as a 3-year-old. Like just walking around the house saying it, didn't know what it meant or whatever. She was just repeating what I was saying. And then my mom and my head of school both approached me and were like, hey, this is probably not a good idea. You should probably get a handle on this. So when I noticed that everybody was following what I was doing, whether I wanted them to or not, that was whenever this kind of whole thing kind of came to a head. So I went to my coaching staff of I think 4 at the time, and I told them, I was like, hey, here's the deal. I've got a problem. Like, my kids at home and our kids at school are doing everything that I'm doing, and they're saying everything that I'm saying, and I have no clue what to do or what to say right now. This is uncharted territory for me, and I don't know what to do. I know I'm supposed to be a man, I'm supposed to be a godly man, lead like a man up, do the things that men do, and in 2018 I had no clue what a man looked like, because our culture wasn't pushing anything manly at all. So what we decided to do is we decided to get together once a week and work through what the Bible says about manhood and about how we're supposed to be living our lives. And that's what we did to better improve our own lives, but also to lead these kids into the way that we knew they should be going, but we just didn't know how. So if you've ever done something like this, you know where this is going to lead to. It was a complete and total annihilation of my previous worldview. I was under the assumption that the world operated in a certain manner, and that the cogs and pieces within it were all in alignment. Well, as we started reading through the book of Romans, that completely changed, and we became completely gripped with the reality that the Bible is true and everything in it is real. And what that did is that, like I said, it flipped my worldview on its head, so much to the point that we were so broken at one point that with a state of humanity that we were wondering, what is the point? And then, as Paul so eloquently puts it, he gives us all the answers to that. And our worldview completely shifted, our mission completely changed, and our definition of success was forever rewritten. So, I started working out. I started eating better. Started waking up early, and most importantly, I started reading everything I could find on manhood, on wisdom, on discipline, on strength, on knowledge. And out of nowhere, I couldn't stop that. And this was one of the most miraculous things about this change in me. I hated reading my entire life. My English teacher actually wrote the foreword for the book. And she was so surprised and so shocked that I not only read something, but I also wrote something. Ever since that summer, there's been this thirst for knowledge and wisdom and the truth of God that is unquenchable. And it really has been a miraculous thing, because I would never choose to do that on my own. It seemed boring to me. So we started reading John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, Charles Spurgeon. We started going into some James White stuff. And then we took a quick religious pivot after that and started reading Jocko Willink, Simon Sinek, some of these professional growth gurus, James Allen, Jordan Peterson. And then after about 4 years of going into this, I realized something very, very big, which is we're about to transition into the book, is that these virtues and these principles that these secular authors were pushing and preaching to give people meaning. They were trying to give young adults meaning and purpose and success. All of these things that they have found to be true align themselves almost perfectly with the things that Paul and Jesus say in the New Testament. So how can this secular worldview borrow from this biblical worldview and there be such a disconnect on the truth of Jesus and the truth of God? And that's kind of where this whole thing started from. So I got very interested in it. So not only did I get very interested in it, our coaches got very interested in it, and we started to take these 6 virtues of strength, courage, discipline, honor, humility, and faith. We put them all over our gym, put them under, if you've played in our gym, you've seen them on our banners. We talk about them once a week with our students in discipleship, and we really started to turn our athletic department we tried to turn it inside out, from our successes, the banners and the championships, from now our successes, the discipleship of our kids. And we've all said it, and I said it for 10, 12 years before we actually started to resource it and prioritize it. I know it sounds stupid to say it, but I have to say it because it happened. The year we changed this and moved the winning the state championships down about 10 or 12 notches on our priority list is the year we started winning championships. So we just won our 4th straight track and field championship, and it's 4 years we've started implementing this stuff. And I know it doesn't always happen like that. That kind of sounds like a Joel Osteen kind of like name it, claim it, you know what I'm saying? So I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that's the way to win, because that's not at all what this book is about. That's not what our athletic department is about. But what I can tell you is that by preaching discipline and strength and courage, and responsibility and sacrifice to our kids, and actually meaning it. Like, that was our definition of success. What I can tell you is that we've all seen boys grow into men and girls go into women in front of our very eyes, and that alone will make you more successful on a field or on a court, and I think it has. So that brings us to this book, and my initial thought process on this was I wanted to write down some of the stuff that I was going through and some of these things that I learned, so that way my kids, when they get older, they would have something tangible to say, hey, this is what Dad learned, this is what Dad did, and then with any luck, they could avoid some of the pitfalls and some of the stagnation, some of the nihilism and self-gratifying stuff that I was doing as a young adult, and maybe they could skip some of that and be better off for it. That was my thought process. Well, then I started pouring it all down, and I gave it to a couple friends of mine, my brother and a couple other dads that I knew at school. And I was like, hey, y'all read this for me. It's just a little project that I'm doing, see if it's coherent, see if it makes sense, and it flows decently or whatever. And everybody, I sent it to like 4 or 5 guys, a couple coaches in this room actually, and everybody gave me the same feedback on it. They said, man, this is really good. If you think that this will benefit your own 2 children, why don't you put this out so that way it can benefit other kids? And I was like, well, nobody's gonna wanna read what I have to say, right? But to my shock, it's actually done pretty well. And I think it's because, like what we were saying earlier, like truth is truth and truth is real, and it doesn't matter where it came from. I mean, we know where it ultimately comes from, and it's not going anywhere, and it's valuable. So that's what I did with this book. My wife has 2 degrees from A&M that helped out with this big time. So she was the one who edited it for me, and it took a long time. A lot of yelling and a little bit of tears. She yelled, I cried. And we got it published, man. So what I want to do for a little bit of time, I don't want to bore you guys too much with it, but I would like to tell you a little bit about it and go over the first chapter and then another one of my favorite chapters in it, because the rest of the book really hinges on this first chapter. And this first chapter, as coaches, you know this full well, is that we're just not good enough the way we are. Jordan Peterson likes to say that you're not good enough the way you are, and if you were, there would be no need for education, there would be no need for discipleship, there would be no need for training classes, there would be no need for school, there would be no need for us as coaches. If every kid that walked into our program when we were like, oh man, they're good enough the way they are, we wouldn't have a job. There would be no need for that. So it's crazy for parents, and I have said this before, and I've had to calm myself down a little before. It's crazy as parents for us to tell our kid, sweetheart, you're good enough the way you are. You don't need to change for this. You don't need to change for this. You don't need to do this. That's a wildly lunatic philosophy to say that you're good enough the way that you are, because our brains develop, our bodies develop. We have to always be training. So we've all had those athletes that get stuck in whatever field they're in, whatever realm they're in, they get stuck and they end up wasting their talents because they think that they're good enough the way they are. They don't think they need to work any harder. And if we're being very honest with ourselves and our personal growth, we do the same thing. We get stuck in that because we don't think that we need that. But then 4 or 5 years go down the road and you haven't made any progress in your personal life, your spiritual life, your emotional, physical, and it's because in some way, shape, or form you thought you didn't need to. So what we realized at Bradsport Christian School is if we don't prioritize and resource our personal growth and our spiritual growth, then it's not going to get done. So you really owe it to ourselves and our future selves to prioritize and resource that spiritual growth, because everything that we do today, as you know this as coaches, we like to build things, we like to orchestrate things. Everything that you do today affects the opportunities and the doors that open for you in the future. And that's what we try to do with our kids and tell our kids the same thing. So we tell our kids to find a way to be a little bit better than you were yesterday, right? And then look in the mirror a couple months down the road, and then you'll see that you're miles away from where you were, but it's because you resourced and prioritized that growth. So that lie that the world will tell you where you don't need to change for anybody, my pet peeve, you do you. I used to say that as in college, you do you, and now as an adult, I'm like, oh, that's the worst thing you could ever tell anybody. Don't do you. Don't be you. You suck. Do better. And really, and I know that sounds harsh, but what I mean by that is Paul in his letter to the Romans tells it better than I ever could. He says, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who does what is good. Like, he lays it down hard. Like, there is no one that is good. There's only ever been one person that's good, man, and he got nailed to a tree to save all of humanity. And that's the only good person there's ever been. So the truth is that we're all made in God's image. But because of our sin, that image has been tainted, right? So no one can do anything good apart from Christ. Not cool. So we're not even close to being good enough, right? So we're in desperate need of a Savior. And that truth, when it gets revealed, is what allows us to live with gratitude and purpose. We give credit to Christ for the life and death that he gave, not credit to ourselves, and we fight like hell against the sin that's creeping into our body. Like, that is the point. In this fashion, we grow and we become less like us and more like Christ. And that's why I say we suck. Like, we tell our kids that all the time. We're like, no, don't be you. Don't do you. Be Christ. Be more like Christ. That's the goal. We are not good. Christ, the only good. So we should try with every fiber of our being to emulate Jesus Christ. And with the Holy Spirit's help, we'll get there at the end. And that's what we try to do as our coaches. We talk about that in our coaches and our training classes all the time. Like, we are supposed to emulate Christ because our kids are emulating us. And that's what we found out 8 years ago, man. Whether we want to believe it or not, some of us don't think we're the cool coach. You are the cool coach. If you're a coach, you're the cool coach. Like, your kids follow you. And if you don't know it yet, the parents, some of them try really hard not to, but most of them fall in line and they follow you too, because their kids come home and say, oh, Coach so-and-so said this, Coach so-and-so said this. How many of you have ever had a kid or a parent come to you and say, thank you so much for saying this to my kid. I've been saying this to him for 10 years, but he just needed to hear it from somebody else. I've had that very same conversation more times than I can count, and it's true. They're following you. So if you are not resourcing your personal growth and your spiritual growth, and AD's in the room, the personal growth of your staff, then you're missing the point and you're missing out on a huge opportunity, because if we don't emulate Christ, our kids will never do it. Now, the full weight of that, their sanctification and their justification, doesn't ever fall on us, and that's not what I want to ever imply. But you have a pivotal role to play in that. So please, please, please resource that personal growth. So that's the first chapter, and that's a big one. That's a fun one for me. What time is it? Okay, we're good. So the next chapter I want to talk about, which is another fun one for me, is the chapter that exposed the lie that it's not my fault. Every coach in here has had a kid tell you that it's not his fault, right? It's not my fault. I didn't do it. It was the referee. It was so-and-so. It was the point guard. It was a bad pass. It was a bad set. It was whatever. So-and-so missed a block. So this is one of my favorite chapters, hands down, because if it's always the coach's fault, then the athlete has no reason to get better. If it's always the referee's fault, the athlete has no reason to get better. If it's always the administration's fault, then the coaching staff has no reason to get better, right? If it's always somebody else's fault, you have no reason to get better. After we started reading through Romans and through a bunch of these Reformed pastors, we read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And if you don't know who Jocko Willink is, it's not going to take long to figure it out when you put it on your Google search. He's a Navy SEAL who basically formed all the training protocols for the SEALs now. And he's a real big deal. And he wrote this book called Extreme Ownership, and he takes ownership because he talks about how in the SEALs, like, you can't blame anybody. You blame somebody, you die. You blame somebody else that you're in charge of dies. So they all have to take extreme ownership of everything that's happening in their lives. And now what he does is he goes to these companies, CEOs of these large companies, and he basically runs through their organization and says, like, okay, this function of your organization is failing. Why are you allowing it to fail? Like, what have you done to? And a lot of CEOs would be like, but I don't even touch that. Like, that's not me, whatever. And he's like, that's your problem. You are not owning this part of your organization. So we really tried to push that in our athletic department about 6 years ago. So much so to where, like, even if it's something that we know we have no hand in, and somebody failed at something, we'll go out and say, hey man, I'm really, hey, what can I do to help you out with that? What could I have done to do that? Laura Sandler does that to me all the time. She's like, I'm so sorry. She's like, I should have I don't remember one time, I messed up. I don't remember what I did. I left something unlocked or whatever, and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I should have driven up there and checked on that. And I was like, no, you don't have to drive up and check on the gym door or whatever. I was the last one there. I should have unlocked it. But it's that extreme ownership principle, right? So this plays big in sports, because if a referee blows a call in a basketball game, I mean, y'all know this, and then we're just like, well, we lost by 1 because that referee blew that call. We should never lost that game. Well, now your kids aren't working tomorrow. But if we say, hey, we went 7 for 12 from the free throw line, if we would have made 2 more free throws, we would have won the game despite that call. Like, that's a simple thing that you can take ownership of instead of blaming the thing that you have no control over. So to improve our chances of winning, did we do everything perfectly? So to any of our athletic directors in the room, if your programs aren't going the way that you want them to do, are we blaming our coaches? Why aren't we coaching them up? Are we setting clear standards of expectations, and are we holding them accountable? Are we blaming our kids and our parents? Man, I fall into this one a lot. Are we saying there's nothing we can do from a leadership perspective to train our kids better, to curb their behavior better? The parents as well. This is what I've learned about our kids and our parents. They do exactly what we allow. So if they're doing something you don't like, it's your fault. You are allowing it in some way, shape, or form, right? Are we blaming our administration? If you don't think you can lead up the chain in your organization, your school, then you need to do some research, you need to read. There are really respectful, impactful ways to lead up the chain. And you can do that, and you should do that. If you see something wrong above you, you have the responsibility to lead up that chain, right? They're not always gonna take it, and change it, but you have the responsibility to lead up that way. And that's a really cool philosophy as well. So my very first athletic director ever, Clayton Hill, he's real old, so some of y'all might know him. He used to say all the time that if nothing changes, nothing changes. So this is something that I've repeated throughout my 13 years of coaching with our kids. If we don't change something and we expect the referee to make a better call next time, guess what? Result's not going to change. So we have to change something and take ownership if we're going to expect a change in the outcome. Like I said earlier, so many things about this game are out of our control. So taking ownership of absolutely everything that we can control and seek those things out. Because this is what I found out. I found out while I was implementing these principles from that Jocko Willink book, I can impact way more in my life than I thought I could by taking ownership of things that aren't necessarily my responsibility. But if I take ownership of everything that I'm coming in contact with and the best way I know how, I found out that I can actually impact things on a much grander scale than what I thought I could. So then, I think I completely forgot to tell you how the book is broken down. So now I'm going to tell you right now. Yeah, sorry, I've already been doing it. But I take a lie that has impacted my life, that really messed me up for a while. And then I tell you about something that one of these secular authors that I really have grabbed onto and have really changed my life, what they said. And I say secular, I actually think some of them are Christian, they just don't claim it publicly. What they say about it, what they're preaching to the secular world. And then in the third part of each chapter, I talk about what the Bible says about that lie, and then show you how it actually matches up with what these guys are talking about. So the Bible is 100% in support of extreme ownership. I'm sure it's not going to take a lot of convincing for you. Ownership, responsibility, and duty. The Old Testament in Ezekiel makes it very clear that the sin of the sinner is attributed to him, right? The righteousness of the righteousness is attributed. The parent will not be held responsible for the kid's sin. The kids will not be held responsible for the parent's sin. So the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against the wicked. So personal responsibility is closely related to the law of sowing and reaping. In Galatians, Paul writes, "Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked, for whatever one sows, he will reap. The one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life," right? So even more about responsibility, which I've always loved, is when Jesus takes responsibility in Matthew to the extreme ownership level, like Jocko did with the speck in the eye, right? Jesus says, why are you worried about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own eye, right? And that's where most people stop it. And they're like, see, you shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't talk about his problems. You shouldn't whatever, try to help him, whatever. Well, that's not what Jesus says, because then right after that, Jesus says, first, fix yourself. Take the plank out of your own eye, the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to help your brother with the speck in his eye. So that directive right there doesn't get talked about often. But that's an extreme ownership level. Like, hey, fix yourself. get yourself right, and then go help your brother. We have a duty and a responsibility to help our brothers and sisters in Christ. So don't let that last part of that biblical narrative fly by, because it's very, very impactful, and it's a very responsible thing that we have to do with our brothers and sisters, right? So that's one of the reasons why I believe that the best thing we can do for ourselves is to prioritize and resource our time with Jesus and our personal growth. Because if we're not growing and developing, we have no ability to help those around us. So this leads us to the last chapter I want to give you a little bit of insight on, and then we can talk about it and hang out and do whatever we want. The last lie, which I believed in often, and it wrecked me up for a little while, is that I can't do that, right? I would see something that somebody else does that I would admire. I'm gonna call her out right now because I like calling her out in front of people. Coach Sullivan tells me all the time, like, man, you're so good at this. I could never do that. And I disagree. I think you could do it. But let's be very real before I open this up. Any of y'all know that J.J. Watt's playing soccer right now? I saw that the other day. I know you do, you dum-dum. So let's be real. All men are not created equal, right? I am not created like J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt's strength is to apparently knock out goalies. J.J. Watt is big and strong, and his strength is to help him wreak havoc on everything, really, right? Like, my strengths are not that, right? I am not built like J.J. Watt, and I never will be. I never had the same opportunities with that in mind that J.J. Watt had, right? So we tell our kids often that you can't do whatever you want to do. Like, you can't be whatever you want to be. It's just not realistic, right? And it sounds harsh, but remember, we're trying to teach the entire kid here. We're trying to teach from a mental, spiritual, physical level. To tell a kid that you can be whatever you want to be is not realistic, right? Now, we tell them that for 3 reasons, and before you turn on me, let me tell you exactly why, right? Number 1, it opens their eyes to the reality that God gave us all different strengths, weaknesses, and tools to use in this life. They need to realize that earlier than later. Number 2, it calibrates them to the reality that there's a decent amount of trial and error in life, and they need to understand how to maximize the use of this process. This is life 101. Trial and error, figure out what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? If you just pigeonhole yourself and be like, I'm gonna play in the NBA, what are you gonna do when you turn 20 and you never made college, basketball, whatever? Like, now what are you gonna do? You cannot pigeon yourself into the hole of one thing. There's a lot of trial and error that goes in. And number 3, they'll find out that they're actually more capable than they think they are of doing a lot of different things, right? So this ensures the maturation of the entire kid, as opposed to pigeonholing himself into one thing and saying, oh, you can be whatever you want to be. You want to be J.J. Watt? You can be J.J. Watt. Well, without a lot of steroids and a lot of other stuff, I'm never going to be J.J. Watt. So Jordan Peterson has a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and he talks about it often. And what I like about what he talks about is he talks about how amazing it is how some of these young kids need one word of encouragement. And one word of encouragement can change a kid's life, and then generally speaking, it will bounce from one kid to another kid, and then another kid, another kid. And then what that does is that actually changes an entire group of kids and an entire culture. Then it can actually, I mean, I don't want to sound, but it can actually change the world if we would just do it with the right perspective and the right way, right? Far too often we see people, and I do it too, we see somebody doing something that could change our quality of life or impact our life in a good way, or our families or whatever, can provide such a boost for us, and we say, man, I wish I could do that, but I just can't, or whatever. Another thing that one of my coaches says all the time to our kids, which I laugh, I'll never not laugh at it, is whenever they say, oh, coach, I can't do that, and he'll always say, not with that attitude, and he'll say it with fun things, or he'll say it with a sport, but like sometimes it'll just be something stupid, and he'll always be like, it's not with that attitude. And I get a kick out of it every time, but it's right, because we have physical limitations, and that's not up for debate, and I'm never going to debate anybody on that. But our attitude and our perspective will either close off future possibilities, or they'll open us up to a world of possibilities that we wouldn't even dream of, like writing a book, right? I hated reading, right? So I'm up here talking to a bunch of strangers I don't know about, and like Cassandra told me, she'd be a nervous wreck, But I'm not, right? It's easy. It's not that hard if you just do it. The coolest thing about this to me, and I learned this from Jordan Peterson as well, is he talks about how if you go into a situation that you don't want to do, and you go into it accepting the challenge, you voluntarily go into the situation, neurologically speaking, your body activates itself for exploration and for mastery. Like you become a beast of sorts, right? When you go into something challenging, you go into it willingly. You go into that same situation unwillingly, involuntarily, not wanting to do it. Your body will actually revert into prey mode. You will just want to survive and get out of it. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to learn anything out of it. You're not, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have to tell a room full of coaches which one is better. And it's that perspective of going into that situation voluntarily. The other thing that I like, and I don't know where I heard this from, but I use it all the time now, consider the cattle and the bison. When a storm is coming, cattle will sense it, and they will immediately start running the other direction. What that does is that ensures them that they're going to be in the storm for a long time. Whereas the bison will sense the storm and immediately start walking into the storm. They embrace the storm, and they do it voluntarily, and they're out of the storm very quickly. It's hard at the beginning, but they get out of it very quickly, where the cattle, they're going to stay in it for a long time, and it's going to be just as hard for a little while, but they don't get out of it because they run away from it instead of opening up to the challenge and doing it, right? That's one of my favorite analogies. So the coolest, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, the coolest thing that I have experienced from a coach when it comes to this right here is we had a girl who was about 5'4", sophomore year. She was a hurdler, and she loved hurdling, but she wasn't that good at it. She ran like a 20-second something, you know, and she enjoyed it and it was fun. So we started working with it, and then after her sophomore year, she got down to like a 19 flat, and then she lost in the regional final to Natalie Rex was her name. She was a really good hurdler from Huntsville, Alpha Omega, lost in the final, and then that was her freshman year. Then her sophomore year, she went to the regional final. We were trying to get her to three-step, our kid was, and she couldn't quite do it. So we went into the regional final, and Natalie was there, and she was just trying to beat Natalie. She's like, I want to beat Natalie. She's the champion. I want to beat Natalie. So I told her in that regional final, she was able to three-step about 3 hurdles. And I told her, I was like, let's just 4-step, because her 4-step was fast enough to qualify for state. So I was like, let's just 4-step and qualify for state, and then we'll work for a week, and we'll 3-step as many as we can at state and let the chips fall where they may or whatever. And she was like, all right, whatever. Well, gun goes off, and I'm watching it. Over hurdle 1, she 3-steps. Over hurdle 2, she 3-steps. Over hurdle 3, 3 steps. Over hurdle 4, 3 steps. She 3-steps, 3 steps, 3 steps. And then over hurdle 7, she was not anywhere close, because she's too tiny, she's too weak, she's too close. She ate it. Ended up finishing 6th or 7th. She was in second. She was right by Natalie, right in second. And then she's just broken after this, right? So I find her under the bleachers after the race. I had to look for her for a little while. Her mom was like under the bleachers. And she was just in tears, man. You could imagine, she's beside herself, and she didn't know what to do. She was just like, so I got to have this really cool conversation. One of that, hey, first of all, you're not Taylor the hurdler. You're Taylor, the daughter of Christ. Like, this is your identity first and foremost, right? And that was a really cool conversation. And to be honest, she took that way more impactfully than I ever imagined that she would. Because I said that to a bunch of kids, right? But she took it very well. And then she was like, I can't 3-step, coach. She was like, I'm never going to beat her. And she was a sophomore. She was like, I'm never going to beat her. And I was like, you can beat her. She was like, how? And I was like, well, she's about, like, her legs go up to your chest. So in order to beat her, you're going to have to 3-step. And she was like, I can't 3-step, coach. I tried. And I was like, first of all, you haven't really tried. Like, you say you tried. You just started hurdling. Like, you haven't tried. I said, how seriously are you taking your weight room? And she was like, oh, you know, coach. And I was like, see? I was like, you're not taking the weight room seriously. You're not really putting in work. You're not trying. You can 3-step. I was like, here's the deal. You want to beat her? And she was like, yes, sir. In tears, yes, sir. And I was like, you want to beat her? Okay. 3 days a week in the weight room, all year long. You never skip. Summers, spring break, Thanksgiving break, you don't skip. You go on vacation with your family, you find a weight room. You do it. 3 days a week, You put in the weight room work. I'll draw up your plans. You put it in. I said, I will teach you how to 3-step. I was like, you can 3-step, you're just weak. You're weak and short. And she was like, all right, whatever. So I say this to we all do this. We say this to a lot of kids. And they normally say, yeah, coach, we're gonna do that. And they don't do that. Well, man, this girl did it 2 years straight. One day over Thanksgiving break, her mom called me and she was like, can you please tell Taylor that she can skip a workout today? And I was like, Taylor, you can skip a workout. You're doing great. But I was opening up our weight room on spring break, summer, Christmas break, 3 days a week, nonstop, straight up, right? So junior year comes, she beats Natalie in a race by 0.01 seconds. She got her time down to like a 17 something. And then the next race, Natalie beats her by 0.01 seconds. And like they are pumped to go into this thing, man. Well, that was COVID. So COVID year took her junior year championship away from her, right? So then she does the same thing all through her senior year, right? All through senior year, I mean, I'm telling you, this girl, her max squat I think was 95 at the beginning, and she was like at 205 or something by the time she was a senior. And she got her, I mean, long story short, it's already been a long story, it's one of my favorite stories to tell, but long story short, man, 2 years in a row, 3 days a week, consistent weight room, she 3-stepped all 10 hurdles at the state championship her senior year and blew everybody out of the water. Ran like a 16.5 or something like that. And now she's at TOU running like a 15.2, something dumb. She's broken like 3 or 4 records for them too. And this is the exact same girl that sophomore year told me, Coach, I can't. I've tried, I can't. And all it took was a little change of perspective and a couple of encouraging words from a coach that she followed and respected, whether we agree to, whether we believe it or not. And then some discipline and commitment, right? And that's all this book is, all that stuff right there, right? That's all it took, and she did it. And this little 5'3" girl is the best track athlete a girl track athlete anyways, now that your son's done what he did, in our school history, right? And brought all of us into record books, won our first state championship as a school, man. So, so you can, right? Yeah, so that's really all I've got. I could go on for a lot more, but I feel like I'm boring people. So here's the deal. So this is 10 Lies and the Truth, man. It's on Amazon. We are going to start using it next year as a sort of discipleship curriculum for our kids as well. So I'm going to be working on building something through with that. So get my email address. I firmly believe that my calling on this earth is to disciple young adults. So if there's any way that I can help you do that, I will do that. This is on Amazon. I've got some copies here as well if you want to get one. But if I can help you as I'm building through this curriculum, if you want to disciple your kids in that manner, man, I would love nothing more to do that. So get my email address, my phone number, or whatever on your way out, and let me help you guys if I can. I appreciate you guys listening to me. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys enjoy your weekend.